All right, everyone, welcome and thank you for coming this evening. Welcome to our very first ever COCA Staff Training Summit. We're very excited that you're here. We're very excited to be offering this Staff Training Summit that was a direct result of that survey, all those surveys that we sent to you in the winter time. One of the biggest pieces of feedback that we got was that we need more staff training, especially this time of year, right, as we're about to ramp up for this summer. So we're very excited to be here. And before I introduce our speaker and presenter for the Staff Training Summit, I do want to recognize that we are sponsored by Care Camps, and we'd like to thank Care Camps for their friendship of COCA, their support of COCA. And we have the Care Camps Executive Director, Gwen Sullivan, here to say a few words this evening. So Gwen, take it away.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you, to see you, and just want to take a quick minute here to give you an update from our Care Camps team. We are actually in the final phase of reviewing all your grant applications, and as the new executive director, I am loving learning all the details about each of your camps. I'm truly so inspired, honestly blown away by all your support and services you provide. We are on track now to begin disseminating our grant funds to the camps who applied within the next 2 weeks. So please stay tuned for more details from us. But really, most of all, I just wanted to hop on here with you to say a huge thank you for all you do for so many children and their families who need it most. We so value and are honored by our partnership together, and our joint mission is why we exist. So please feel free to reach out to myself, my teammates anytime. We are here for you and appreciate all your updates, your suggestions, and your feedback. So enjoy your webinar and please stay in touch. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Gwen. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter who will be speaking at all 3 of our staff training summits this week. It is Professor Dave Malter, soon to be Dr. Dave Malter. He is the director of the Camp Administration and Leadership Program at Gratz College. And he's been a great supporter of COCA. So Dave, take it away.
Unmute yourself, Dave.
Got it. Thanks, Jennifer. See, I knew that was going to happen. We talked about that. Hi, everybody. How are you? Hope you're doing well. Always good to be with COCA. Always good to be part of these types of events. I'm excited to be here. Right off the bat, I'll tell you to bear with me just a little bit. I'm getting over a little bit of a sinus infection, illness of some sort that time of year. So I'm going to power through, but if I pause or if I clear my throat or something, just it'll be okay. It's good to see everybody. As we start off, if you can just do me a favor and in the chat, just put in your name, where you're from, what camp you represent, some information about yourself so we know who's in the room and as we're talking to each other tonight. So I'm excited to present this first session, which is really interesting to me because when Jennifer and Ryan proposed this, it was really interesting because I am currently working on 2 projects that for other organizations that are exactly what they asked me to talk to you about tonight, which is really making tough decisions, I think is what it boils down to, figuring out how to make the most of our limited time at camp when we're doing training. Both of the other projects I'm working on, in addition to some other things, are 1-week volunteer camps. Just by chance, I tend to do a lot of work with those types of organizations, much like most of yours. And it was just good timing and something that's really been on my mind, something that I'm really working a lot on. So hopefully some of those lessons I've been learning are helpful for tonight. I will say right off the top that my job when I do anything like this is not to tell you what to do. I want to make that clear that I'm not going to tell you include this, don't include this, and get rid of that. It's just not my role. My role is to walk you through some sort of process and how we come up with that and how we figure out what we need to be doing, what are the important pieces, what can we not miss, what can we do a little less of, how do we format it, what kind of tools can we use, those types of things. So don't expect an answer per se of what the right way to do things is, because everybody's program is unique, everybody's style is unique, everybody's needs are unique, but really just walking you through some sort of process on how to make some of these decisions. So it is going to be some interaction. We're going to try some online on the spot polling and hope that I figured out the technology. And then we'll get into a little bit more of the process and things like that. So along the way, if you have any questions, I think Ryan's going to be monitoring the chat. Feel free to chime in. You could always just stop me too. Say, hey, Dave, I have a question. Don't be shy. Makes it a little bit more of a interactive and a little more fun if you ask questions and chime in. So with that, let's see. I'm going to start off with what I like to call my soapbox. And it really is. And it's meant as a way of, here are the things that I've been thinking about, that working with lots of different camps and just coming back from big conference season and speaking to Ryan and Jennifer about needs of a lot of your organizations and other clients of mine and students in the program. These are the things that I've been thinking about that I think are really important. So first of all, this is a big push of mine, and it has been for a long time, that in-person training needs to be fun, bottom line, and it needs to feel like camp. And I know there's lots of important pieces and lots of serious things we have to do as well, but ultimately the bottom line is it needs to be fun, it needs to feel like camp, and that needs to be a focus. Because if people are coming to volunteer your camp for a week or however long that they're there, they don't want to walk into another sterile place where it's really serious and it doesn't feel like what's going to happen when the kids get there. They want to feel that they're part of this community, that they're part of something engaging and interesting and motivational and sincere. So that's one of my soapbox pieces. As the premise of all of this is that you're all under time constraints, that there's a real issue with however long your training is. I'm going to assume that for some of you, it's 12 hours. For some of you, it might be 24 or 36 hours, somewhere in that range. We can talk a little bit more about that. And that means there has to be tough decisions. And that we'll talk more about as well. I will say that no matter the age of your volunteers and the age of Zoom and coming out of COVID and with the Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and whatever you use in terms of social media or online, that the type of classroom learning that maybe a lot of us on this call are used to is not okay anymore. And we can't do that. 45-minute sitting in a room together, lecturing, somebody in front of the room is just not going to appeal to most people that are coming to camp to dedicate their time. We have to be more creative. We have to think about different ways of presenting information. It can't be the same old, and those kind of lecture style interactions aren't really hitting the mark anymore. And evaluations have proven that. Conversations in the hallways of conferences and at staff trainings have proven that people want something different, and the attention spans were never really there, and they're definitely not there anymore. As somebody who has spent a long time in classrooms, for the first half of my teaching career at college, in college classrooms, it was in person exclusively. There was no real online learning, and now moving that more towards an online learning situation, some hybrid. Those lectures are just not working anymore. It's not something that anybody really thrives in at this point. So again, soapbox. So what that leads to is smaller chunks of information, really taking things down into their essence. What is really the important information, getting, kind of trimming the fat a little bit and breaking up information into smaller chunks that you can present in smaller spans of time in different ways that isn't overwhelming and it's not going to bore people. I would venture to guess, I don't have scientific data for it, I haven't looked at it in a long time, somebody's attention span is not going to be more than 10, maybe 12 minutes. And we need to respect that, and we need to understand that. And we have to make sure that the information we're giving them that's so important, because everything you're doing is going to be important, that they actually engage with it, they understand it, it's being absorbed, and then they can go ahead and use it as they're taking care of kids this summer. A big part, I think it goes diagonally across with being fun, is that helping people connect is going to be a huge part of what you do in person. And that's a part of, I think, staff training that sometimes gets lost when we're trying to cover all of this information. And we're trying so hard to get it all in that we forget that ultimately people really thrive on connection and they want to get to know each other. And you need to build a strong team very quickly in order to make sure that camp is successful. If you only have 12, 24, 36, whatever number of hours it is, even if you have a week or 2 weeks, and some camps have 3 weeks of training, building those connections is what's going to make your camp as strong as it can be. Because once you build those connections with staff are building connections with each other, what's going to happen is that they're going to look out for each other. They're going to make sure that the other person is okay. They're also going to help each other, and they're going to be more likely to step in and get somebody's back instead of ignoring or not paying attention or whatever it might be. So along with being fun, there has to be kind of this intentional unintentionality. So you want to make it seem unintentional, but you're building it in an intentional way where they're really getting to know each other. They're spending time together in a way that allows them to really build friendships and build relationships without necessarily like standing in a circle, yelling each other's names across the circle while they throw something at each other, which has kind of been the traditional way that we do team building. And I think it needs to go a little bit deeper than that. So connection is really key. And lastly, that putting things online will work, but it depends on you. So asking people to spend a little bit of time online ahead of time to do some of these more serious that you have to do, that you can't sacrifice, it will work, but it requires your commitment and your ability to do that. And those are really a big part of the projects that I'm working on right now with these other organizations is what information can we give before they get there, make sure that they're getting it. There's assessment, there's pieces to it. It's not long, it's more interesting. You can use all sorts of different types of mediums, whether it's podcasts or YouTube videos or TED Talks or video that you make or whatever it might be, that's getting people to understand more of your culture, more of what's needed from them, what it's like to take care of kids, appropriate behavior, whatever it might be, whatever your decision is. And we're going to talk a lot about that today, but this is something that you should consider, you should think about. It's not very difficult. It just requires some time and effort and really you leading the charge and you saying, this is something that we're going to do. It's going to work and we're going to figure out how to do it together. So those are my soapbox issues that I just wanted to start with so you understand some of the things I'm going to talk about as we go through. Is everybody good? Ryan, I need to know anything? Good? All right. So here's our roadmap for today. I think it's really important. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Then we all share and learn from each other. It's a big part of the work that we do, and it's why we invite you to all come together in these type of environments. Thinking about making some hard decisions. What can we lose? What can we not lose? Thinking about adapting and adjusting and not just pulling out the plan from the past 10 years or the past 2 years, whatever it's been, and just saying, okay, we're ready to go, let's do it. Trusting others and their input, and then the meat of it, and what's really hopefully gonna be most helpful as we go through this is a process of how to do this. And I'll talk a little bit more about my process and how I've been able to do this with other places, and then talk a little bit about evaluation. So that's kind of where we're headed tonight. So, and we should be able to get through it all. So starting with sharing and learning from others. We cannot do this in a vacuum. And it's true. All of you are doing unique things. You're from unique situations, unique programs. I would guess that none of you are doing the same thing, and you can learn from each other. It's why we do conferences. It's why we do staffing summits like we're doing tonight and over the next couple of nights, is so you can hear from other people, not just me, and really learn and really hear. And it might not be something that you're going to do necessarily, but a lot of times you'll sit in the room or sit on the Zoom and you'll take a note because something in your mind says, well, that person does this. I couldn't do that necessarily, but it's making me think that maybe I could do this, or some way of doing what they're doing in my environment. So I think it's really important that we do share with each other and that we do take the time to figure out what other people are doing, what's worked and what hasn't worked, and ask lots of questions and think about what other people have found works in their camps. You know, a big part of the program that I teach at Gratz, the master's program, a bulk of the 2 years almost program is meeting and collaborating with other students. So I provide a lot of resources and some guiding questions, but for the most part, students are interacting with each other and talking to each other online through discussion forums, occasionally live Zoom, and asking each other questions and challenging each other sometimes, or, you know, just being curious, and it pays off. So that's why I think it's really important that we start off with sharing and learning from others and what they're doing. So we're going to try this. So hopefully you can see up at the top. Mine's actually in the way, so I can't see my own. But there is a number up there, and you need to text that Dave Malter, or whatever the number is, to that text number. And then you should be able to answer this question. So your first step is to take out your phone and type in the directions up there, text to, and then you're going to text your answer to this poll, and it's going to work because it's worked in the past. So once you start typing in, you're going to see these responses. And the question that I think is a good baseline to figure out where everybody's coming from is, how long is your in-person training? It just might make you feel better, hopefully not worse, about where you are, what you're doing. So hopefully this works for everybody. Either unmute or chat. If it's not working, it's pretty straightforward. Hopefully you can see it. There we go. It worked for somebody. 7 days, amazing. 8 hours. Oh, so I was a little off. 1 week. Another 1 week. 32 to 36 hours. Great. 1 day, 3 to 4 hours. So that 4 hours before camp, if the person who wrote that doesn't mind unmuting, is that online or in person?
That is also in person.
In person. Okay. So you do a weekend or something beforehand.
Yep.
Got it. Thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot. 8 hours. 8 hours seems to be a couple of those 2 days. There's a few weeks. Okay. So there's an interesting range there of time, which is great. So I'm going to move to the next poll. So don't go anywhere. Keep your phones out. So let's share some must-haves. What are some things that you think in your organization you have to do in person? That there is no compromise. It's something that you have to do in person. And again, this is just so everybody can kind of get a feel for what other people are doing. Abuse training. Child abuse prevention. Emergency scenario. Rules and policy. Okay. Behavior management. Abuse prevention. Okay. So I'm going to start a conversation, if that's okay with everybody. Registration. I'm going to have start a conversation, just ask a question. For those of you, and now I want to keep in mind, as more of my background, I work as an AM Skyer partner, and I actually go around to about 35 to 40 camps a year doing abuse training. So this comes from that place. But I had a question. Why do we need to do abuse training in person? If anybody's willing to answer that question. Or I'll phrase the question differently. Does it all have to be done in person? And I'm just curious of what people think.
I'll throw it out there. We do some video trainings beforehand, and then we basically just hit on the really big things once we're here in person. I was one of those who said we have the 8-hour training. So we actually have about 4 or 5 hours of online trainings that we have all of our volunteers do beforehand. And then we really just hit on those big concepts when they're here.
So when you do it, thanks, Derek, I appreciate it. So when you're doing it in person, it's a reinforcement. It's making sure that they got the key points.
Correct.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It's like you were reading my mind. Somebody typed rules and policy. Let's talk about that one a little bit. What sorts of rules and policies are we doing in person that we couldn't necessarily do beforehand? And again, just to start a conversation about it and start thinking about these things.
I'd say those emergency procedures and kind of, acting that out, making sure people know what to do, those types of policies. And, you can send them a copy of the rules, the staff rules and things like that. And, maybe a Google quiz to make sure they read it. But those kind of important procedures, I think, need to be definitely reiterated in person.
Right, so you're practicing, right? So you're practicing those procedures of what happens if there is an emergency. It's clear to everybody where you go, what the sounds sound like if you're blowing a horn or whatever it might be. Great. All right, so lots of must-haves that are really focused on those things that happen in person that we couldn't replicate online, right? You can't really replicate emergency procedures online. Now you can speak to behavior management if you're online, right? Or beforehand in some way, but there has to be some reinforcement in person. Yes, swim training, absolutely. Getting people registered, absolutely. So I think these are all great must-haves. And then the next question is gonna challenge you again to share what are you willing to sacrifice in person? So if you have 8 hours or a week, and you feel like you don't have time, right? That maybe that's why you're here, because you feel like you just don't have time. There's too much to cover. What are those things that you feel like you could do beforehand or in a different way, or maybe not do at all? So policies and procedures can be handled differently for sure. What else can you sacrifice? What else can you kind of save yourself a little bit of time and focus on some of those other pieces that are really important? Planning session rules, personnel policies, schedule review. Weekly logistics. Really like everybody here. Whoever's writing all this is my heroes. Right, counselor specific basics. Some of the medical. I'll wait a couple more minutes, see if any others roll in here. So I really want to touch upon just quickly these three right here that are on screen. Hopefully you can see them. Weekly logistics, general schedule, schedule review, and then I'll go back up and see what other new ones popped up. But for me, I look at it this way. The majority of you are hiring staff that are 18 or over, that have had some experience in life, that maybe are in college, post-college. The amount of time we spend on, where the bathrooms are, where lunch is, what the schedule looks like. They're going to figure all of that out. And I say that often when I go to camps and speak to camps about staff training. When you're working with limited time, like so many of you are, we might not be able to spend that much time on it. And we have to just understand that they'll figure it out, that they'll understand how it works. Maybe they don't need to know every single detail. You can run through it quickly. If you're going to have a meal together, just say, this is how it's going to work at camp, kind of pay attention. But as long as everybody gets fed and it works, and the kids they know who has an allergy, who can't eat what, then you're in good shape. Organization and history, somebody really doesn't want to spend more time on that. Anything informational and not experiential, I like that. These are great answers. History of camp, right? You know, some of these cultural pieces I think are important, but do we need to spend an hour talking about the history of camp? I don't know if anybody disagrees, but the mission is more important. The culture is more important than the history of. And they'll get a sense of what the history is through these other pieces. So these are all great, hopefully helpful as you think about your own training and those things that you're doing. So a big part of thinking through is really making hard decisions, because we are so committed to what we do and what we want to be doing. And it's worked, right? I think for a lot of us, it's worked. It's okay. We make it through, however long camp is, we make it through. It's okay. We feel good about it. But we really have to think about, can we make sacrifices? Can we cut pieces? And my advice is that you can, but again, going back to that idea of a vacuum, it shouldn't be made in a vacuum. Because what happens is if you cut those pieces, if you make those hard decisions and you just present it to, whether you have a leadership group, you have a group of veteran volunteers or staff who weren't part of that decision-making process, it's going to make it much more difficult for you. So my biggest piece when it comes to making these hard decisions is involving others in your organization, putting together a group, spending an hour going through what you've always done and really asking yourselves, is this what we should be doing? Can we make this shorter? I'm not saying get rid of everything and, you know, just move to one singular idea, but really thinking about, do we need to spend this much time on this particular piece? What would be more valuable? What would be more impactful? Are we willing to even look at it? And asking those kinds of questions of others, because you want that buy-in. That buy-in is going to be incredibly important for you in making these changes that you're going to need to make. And then along with that, I think it's really hard. You know, I was an English major in college and grad school, and I still find that editing myself is the hardest thing that you can do, because there's pride and ego involved, and that's just who we are as human beings. And we just have to kind of look in the mirror and say that to ourselves and say, okay, I get it. You did this. You've been doing well. You're competent. You're able to do it. It's been working. It makes sense for me. I like the way that it all works. But also I understand that times change and there might be some new information. There might be a new way of doing things, and really finding the strength, because it's really hard to adjust and adapt. And that's something that is really difficult. When you have ownership of something and you've been doing it for so long and you've put a lot of time and effort into what you're doing, this piece of it is probably the hardest. This is where a lot of people get stuck in saying, I know that I need to do something different. I just don't even know where to start, because you're so attached to it. And it's become such a part of who you are. And also it becomes May or maybe early June, and you don't have time, and you feel like you don't have time. And what can you possibly do? And how do I adjust? How do I adapt now? I did a session at the American Camp Association Tri-State Conference a few weeks ago, and I was doing a session about small changes to make a big impact in your camp. And we talked a lot about staff training, and somebody said that their big issue is that they don't start thinking about staff training until a few days before it starts. And then they get stuck and it becomes a block for them. So I said, well, start thinking about it in September, and every week spend 20 minutes thinking about it. And those small little adjustments, and then just a little bit of time rethinking and reconfiguring and asking other people what they think and listening to conversations like this will really help you in the long run. Again, getting out of your own way is really hard sometimes, but it's something that we have to do. Understanding again that learning styles are different now, that people's attention spans have drastically changed. I see it every day in the work that I do and the students that I work with. And you have to find ways to be creative and meet them where they are. There used to be this philosophy of you do what the boss says, I'm the boss, you do it this way. It doesn't work really anymore. You have to be willing to adjust to other people, and as a good leader, really understand what their needs are. And you're not going to make everybody happy all the time. That's almost impossible. But at least you're going to say to them, okay, you maybe ask them, like, how do you like to learn? What is your preferred learning style? How long can you sit in a classroom before you lose focus? I mean, asking these types of questions in all seriousness, and then adjusting as much as you can. And even if you can't fix everything, and there are going to be things that you need to spend 45 minutes on, which is understandable, especially with the populations that you're working with. There's some real serious work that needs to be done. And, the abuse prevention piece is really important. I totally agree. But if you're showing some goodwill and they're saying, all right, well, we did this for 15 minutes and, we did that for 45 minutes, but at least, there were a couple things that were shorter and that were more interesting. And I kind of get it. I guess I can put up with this 45-minute piece because I understand how important it is. And the leader, the person who's organizing it, they made an effort, right? So there's some goodwill going on back and forth, but it starts with asking again. It starts with recognizing people's needs, and really you have to adapt. You can't expect people necessarily to walk in and adapt to what you're doing. You need to go in their direction. And that's a really important piece that's going to become more and more important each summer as we go forward. Really, really an important piece that I think we need to work on all together. So here's some guiding. The next piece of this is going to be talking about process. And feel free to stop me anytime or ask any other questions or disagree or agree or whatever you want. I'm happy to talk more about all this. But as we move towards kind of how you do this, here are some guiding principles about how you make these kind of decisions and change some of the things that you're doing at your staff trainings. First of all, remember that this is up to you. You have to make the decision. So coming here tonight, maybe you've done some work before you've gotten here, but at least this is a step in the right direction. And saying, you know what, I want to think more about what I'm doing and how I can make this more effective and more efficient and work better for my staff, but also get the information out there in a better way and free up some time to do some of those things that are more important. So it's really up to you. You've got to decide and stand up for it and say, this is what I want to do. And it's not succumbing to pressure from anybody else. It's really your decision. Everything that you're doing has to be easily translatable, right? So thinking about simplifying information, how do you present it? How do you, right? What kind of format are you going to be using, right? Thinking about the way people are given information today in short bursts, very graphic, very visual. What's translatable? What can we do to make things translatable? Making sure that it's making an impact and it's not because you've always done it, right? Thinking about what really is impactful. What really do I need to do to make this training as important and impactful as it can be, and not because it's always been on the list of things. It's always been on, Saturday at 1 o'clock after lunch, we always do this session. Well, do we have to? Is that where it belongs? Is it a session we even need to do anymore? Is it relevant? Is it making the type of impact, or is there something else we can do? Or can I do it at 11 o'clock? Is it tradition? Is it because it's just the way it's always been? whatever the reason is, thinking about what can I change? What can I look at objectively and take myself out of it and think, okay, maybe this will work better. It is a no-brainer. And some of you even alluded to it earlier, some things that you can get rid of, right? Because you want to optimize the time that you have together and really think about, if you only have 8 hours, how do we make sure that those 8 hours aren't necessarily full of information, but the information that's being presented is actually absorbed, understood, and then they can implement it? Or do we take those 8 hours, plant some seeds, and figure out how we continue growing that as camp goes on, right? Are there ways to start in that 8 hours and then keep feeding them information as we go forward, right? Or are we saying we have 7 days so we can kind of do everything, but is that working as well? Are we still allowing time for connection? Are we allowing time for information to be absorbed? Are we allowing them to learn in a way that works for them? So really thinking about the time you have and making the time together as powerful as you can make it. We also, I understand that we don't want to sacrifice what I'm putting in quotes, the important stuff. And I put it in quotes because that's different for everybody on this call. For many of you, it's medical, right? But even somebody wrote on there, things that we could think about sacrificing. Some of the medical pieces we can sacrifice or approach differently. So we don't want to sacrifice anything that's important. I would never suggest that. It's why I started by saying, I can't tell you what you need to include and what you don't need to include. That's a decision that I can give my opinion on or give some guidance on, but I can't tell you because that's unique to your institution and the issues that you're dealing with and the culture that you're dealing with, the staff that you have. All of those things play in. I don't know enough. You do, and the people around you do. So again, asking lots of questions, but you don't want to sacrifice anything that you think is really important. But again, can you approach it in a different way? Can you present it in a different way? Can you move it? Can you change the language that you're using? So it doesn't have to go away, but it can be done in a different way. And again, this idea of building connection. And it's there again, because it's something that I think is very important as we see our staff needs change, the needs of our communities change, and coming out of this pandemic, without getting too much into it, I think the idea of connection is much more important than it's ever been. And we need to honor that and really think, what do people need from each other, right? Do they need to know exactly where everything is around camp? Or do they need to know that they can trust and believe in and lean on the people around them? And how do they get to do that? By building these types of connections. So just thinking through that process a little bit. So I'm going to just pause. Any questions so far or comments? Everybody's good. Ryan, I'm good.
Hi, Dave. I have a comment. It's Michelle from Sunrise Association.
Hi, Michelle.
One of the things you were talking about September, thinking and planning in September, one of the things we have on our evaluation or questionnaire at the end of the summer is, do you feel that you had enough information and were prepared for the role that you were in? And if not, what do you think would be beneficial to help you in that? And we actually use that in planning and thinking toward the following year's orientation and development.
That's great, Michelle. What are some of the things that you got? Can you share some?
Not knowing how to handle some behavioral issues, even though you deal with behavioral issues, that you're doing behavior management, et cetera. Sometimes not really understanding and knowing the systems or who to go to for what, or, even though they learn the hierarchy of who to go to when they're in the thick of it, it's tough. And so, some of the issues.
Yeah. It's interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. That behavior management piece is really interesting. It's a lot of the work that I do with camps. And I think what we try and do sometimes, and this is not an accusation at all, Michelle, this is general. I think a lot of times we try and predict all the issues that are going to happen, right? Instead of talking about the underlying idea behind behavior, which sometimes gets in the way, because what if something happens that we didn't talk about? Then what do you do? So that's a really interesting, I hear that a lot from staff, even though we spend a lot of time I'm assuming everybody here does in some way, on behavior management and, attributes of kids at different ages, brain function, whatever it is, but it's an interesting one. I also, we talk about September. I know I threw that out there, and I know the majority of you probably use volunteers, but what if we were giving information all year long? My experience has been that a lot of your camps have people who come back year after year. What kind of like what you do with COCA, where there's programming year round? What if we were able to do more of that? And it doesn't have to be a Zoom that they're dedicated to. It could be just sharing information. It could be a conversation. It could be an invitation to something. Just thinking about how do we maintain those connections and also get them thinking about camp even when it's not camp. And maybe it starts in February or March, or maybe you do it year round if you have the capacity. But thinking about creative ways to not wait until that 8 hours that you have when they get there, or those 2 hours, or the week, or whatever it might be, thinking about ways to extend that time and have them thinking about some of these big picture ideas. The hierarchy piece that Michelle mentioned is really interesting because I'm sure she talked about it. I'm sure it was pretty clear about this is how it works. But you might have people coming from different environments who don't understand camp and don't really get it. And we need to be really intentional about how we do that. So great. Thank you, Michelle. That was really helpful. Anybody else want to chime in? Everybody's good? All right. All right, so let's get into a little bit of the bulk of, not the bulk, but the kind of the main idea of this session, which is really the process. And I'm just going to walk you through kind of how I think of this. And I really think of this as almost like a big research project. And for me, what I'm talking about when I say the process, I live in Philly, even though I'm not a Philly, where I'm a New Yorker, but I live in Philly. So trust the process is like a big thing here. It must have gotten into my head in the basketball, the Sixers. So when I'm talking about the process of making decisions about your staff training, and the process of where do I start? How do I change this? And it can be as big or as little as you want it to be, but these are the steps that I typically take. And again, as I look at it as a research project, I like to lay it all on the table and just literally put it on the table. What do we do? What materials do we have? A to Z. What are we doing? What do we currently do? What do we want to do? What are some of the different areas? So as a teacher, I think of it in terms of modules or units or whatever you want to call it, right? So there might be a behavior management one. There might be a sexual abuse and prevention one. There might be a mental health for staff module, whatever those things are. So as you're gathering all of this information, all of the things that you do, what category do they fall in, right? So you're really just getting everything out. And so when I'm working with an organization about trying to do this work, I literally ask them, I say, send me everything you've ever done the past 3 years or however long it is, every piece of paper you've handed out, every presentation that you've done. And I literally print it out and I treat it almost like a puzzle. And I start separating out and organizing into different groups and figuring out how much of something you're doing, what it is you're doing. Sometimes they don't have material. So I just say, just type up a little blurb. What does it look like? And we start separating things into categories. Okay, great. So you have all this information. Some is light, some is old, some isn't relevant anymore. Some you don't have anything on. You just know that this is an area that you cover. You can't find it. You don't have it. It's fine. The next piece of this is going outside of what you already have. We live in a world where there is so much information out there, and it's free and it's fantastic, and you don't have to use all of it. You just have to attribute it to whoever you took it from. So again, it's a research project. You're citing where you got the information from. You're giving them full credit. You can ask permission if you want, but there are so many resources out there about behavior management, about speaking to your boss, working with a supervisor, about mental health, about sexual harassment, about sexual abuse. There's every subject that you can think of, there's information out there. So I've taken all this information, I've laid it all out on the table, and then I build a spreadsheet, or however you like to organize your information. For me, a spreadsheet works really well, or a table, and it's built into these different categories, these different modules or units, and I start plugging in the resources that are available. Some of them are already existing, and some are going to be new. I found this YouTube video, and you start building a library almost for yourself. Found this great YouTube video, found this great article on the ACA website. You know, whatever it might be at the COCA library, right? COCA has all these resources, and I found a really great one about explaining, you know, what it is to run a camp for kids with cancer if you've never done it before, right? How to work at one. So looking at these resources, and just, it doesn't have to be perfect. You just start adding to this list, okay? And you start thinking about, oh wow, this could be really good. This could be something really interesting that I might want to use. And you just lay it all out there. And you're chunking all this information together. You're putting it into groups. You're then saying, okay, so it's within behavior management, and both of these talk about, you know, one is a behavior management 101. One of these is really a next level. Maybe it's just for supervisors. Maybe it's just for somebody who has more experience, not so much a first-time counselor or volunteer. So you start really organizing this information. And again, you're not doing this in a vacuum necessarily. You should be doing this with other people, asking for outside help, maybe, whatever it might be. So again, you're just taking all this information and starting to sort it out and figuring out what it is that I think I could use. And it could be big, right? There might be a lot on there, but that's okay. Then you have to decide what makes the big show. And by the big show, I mean your staff training and orientation, right? There are going to be some things, kind of the exercise we did in the beginning, that as you're going through this, you say, I have to do this. This has to be included. I have to figure out a way to get this into my in-person staff training. There's no doubt about it. I'm going to either keep something that I've used in the past, or I have some new piece of information that I'm going to swap out, or I'm going to recreate or make something new, whatever it is. But there, you go through and you decide, again, maybe with others, with other stakeholders, and say, I'm gonna have to do this. And you highlight it, or whatever system that you come up with, these have to make it. And that's really starting to build the framework for what you're doing in person. Then you can decide, okay, so I have all this other information that I think is really important, that I'd like to share with people. And based on your capacity and what time of year it is, and what type of staff that you have, and what you know those limitations are, you decide what can be delivered outside of that limited training time. So for some of you, it was some of this behavior management piece. We can maybe look to just send this to people. Maybe you're not so concerned about assessment, so you're not so worried about using a system that allows for, you know, some sort of quiz or whatever it might be. You just want to get this information out so you can kind of refer to it later on. But again, deciding what do I want to keep that can be delivered outside of whatever limitations you have in person. And again, different color, different process, identify it in some way, and you're going to start seeing this pattern developing of, oh, I really like these types of resources. I didn't know it, but I really like TED Talks. So I really like these short YouTube or Vimeos that I found. And really, I really like blogs for some reason, right? You're going to start seeing a pattern of these pieces that you really like, and you can start piecing them together. There we go. And then go for it, right? Make whatever changes you can and try it and see how it goes. It might not be perfect. It's not going to work every single time, right? There should be another arrow kind of over between go for it and lay it all on the table, because you're probably going to do it again at the end of the summer or whenever you have time in September. And you're going to say, oh, wow, maybe I need to do this circle again. But what you're doing is you're trying to make hard decisions in an informative way and in an educated way, and doing your due diligence and trying to find more information and to do things a little bit differently, and figuring out some ways of delivering information that maybe you've never delivered before, or in a way that you've never done it before. So that's what this process is for me, is with others, is starting very kind of big and broad and getting narrower and narrower. And that's kind of the key for all of this. So that's the process that I kind of go through when I'm doing this kind of work of what do we need to keep, what can we get rid of, what can be done, delivered before camp, what can be delivered at training. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions about that? All good? Okay. So the next piece of this is evaluating what you've done. And I think that we're, as an industry, being in the camp industry for a long time, we're a little bit afraid sometimes of evaluations. But Michelle brings up a good point. You never know until you ask, and she found out some great information and can adjust from there. So I recommend you ask often. You ask everybody, your stakeholders, whoever it might be, remembering that criticism is good, that if you get what we'll call negative feedback, which I don't think is negative, it's okay. And you kind of want that. You're not going to get any better if people just check the box and say, everything's awesome, you're the best, because then there's no room for improvement. There's no way to even think about improving. So getting some criticism will be helpful to you and help you rethink these changes that you made. The next piece that's really important is follow up. You'll be able to see who filled out the survey, right? Who evaluated, who you spoke to, call them, shoot them an email. You know what, I got your evaluation. I really appreciate your feedback. Can we talk more about this? Maybe you can be helpful in helping me rethink this piece of training, or this is something maybe you do in your professional life and you can help us, right? As an organization, maybe you'd like to help present this information in the future, but let's just have a conversation about it and figure out how we can move forward. Because I really value what you said, instead of ignoring it and nothing ever changes. And that's really the key, that if you're going to evaluate, if you're going to ask the questions, if you're going to engage, then you have to change, and you have to make the change known, and you maybe acknowledge the person that encouraged you to make that change, right? You say, you know what, Dave filled out this evaluation last year. He really opened my eyes to what we were doing that wasn't making sense necessarily. And now here we are. Now we're doing this differently. So really taking advantage and using evaluations to your benefit instead of your detriment, and doing as much of it as you can, and asking questions. It could be formal, it could be informal, it's totally up to you, but really trying to figure out where people are. So with that, just some key takeaways of what you can do. So again, big time, learn from others. I think I've made that pretty clear. It's something that I think is really, really important. Starting with you, being open to change, taking a look in the mirror. It doesn't all have to be at once. Think about your priorities. Think about, maybe there's 3 things that you want to focus on this year that are really, really important to you, that you've gotten feedback in the past. And those are the 3 things that between now and the beginning of staff training, you're going to focus on. And maybe it's 1, maybe it's 3, maybe it's 5, whatever your capacity is, but do something, right? Start that ball rolling. Again, I believe in connections, in building these strong teams, because it'll lead to success, because people will look out for each other. They'll get behind the mission of your camp and the mission of your leadership and what you're trying to do. So when you are thinking about what can we add into staff training, what more do we need, please focus on connections and finding time for them to just get to know each other. And it doesn't have to be so forced. It can seem unintentional. Just opportunities is what you're trying to create. Trying some new delivery methods for the information that you're delivering, I think that was an awful sentence, I apologize, but really thinking about how do we present this information that's relevant to the people that are in front of us. And is it a 45-minute lecture? Maybe it is for some topics, but for the most part, it can be done in different ways, allowing different voices. So it doesn't all have to come from you or just a couple of people. It can be multiple voices. It can be different approaches. It can be different methodology. Try and think about how you can deliver things. And those could be huge changes without even changing content, just the way we deliver it. Again, small changes make huge differences. So this doesn't need to be drastic. It doesn't need to be life altering. It doesn't have to cause a huge amount of stress. can be small things that you're tweaking that people recognize, that you've listened, you're open to change, and it's just going to snowball and lead to more and more. And then again, don't do this in a vacuum. Find out what other people are thinking, ask questions, shoot an email out, try and get an hour with somebody or half an hour with somebody, 15 minutes from somebody, whatever it is, whatever you have the capacity for, that they might be able to share with you and help you. Because you want to make sure that other people feel empowered and that they're part of the solution. So make sure that you're doing that as you go through this process. Evaluate, which is the last piece I talked about, and then adjust as needed, right? It's a continuous project. It's not to sound scary, but it's never going to end. We always should be thinking about how we're presenting information, what information we're presenting, what the priorities are, and those might change from year to year, depending on what's going on in the culture, what's going on in our environments, what's going on at camp, what happened the summer before, right? Some issues that came up, whatever it might be. So make sure you're evaluating and taking those evaluations and taking some proactive action afterwards. So with that, I will say thank you and happy to take any questions or comments or whatever it is you want to talk about.
I was going to ask a question.
Yeah.
When you guys, if you have a staff training schedule that you give to your volunteers, do you put little times by each item that you're going to discuss so they don't freak out if it's like 20 minutes on this or 10 minutes on this? Is that helpful or hurtful? I don't know. I was just wondering what people do.
I got it.
So
Go ahead.
I have found that really beneficial to have the times next to it. And especially because we break up our training with like sing-alongs. So we can teach all of the new volunteers, the new staff about the camp songs. Sometimes
It sounded like it was being a really great answer, but Hannah froze on us. All right, Hannah, try again. You look
okay.
like you're back.
So I pretty much just said we will try to like have all of the times on there. And even if it's like something that's just for 5 minutes, because we'll do sing-alongs to teach all of the staff like the camp songs in between bigger info sessions. So I've found that it helps.
That's great. You know, something that I've learned, Jennifer, through the years, a lot of camps, and again, this is not personal to anybody, but I go to a lot of camps and they hand out staff schedules for staff training that are just like full pages spreadsheets sometimes that are, as everybody, you know, people work in different areas, have different sessions they have to go to, whatever it is. And it is so confusing that the only person who really understands it is the person who built that spreadsheet. So I think it's important to give people some information, but not to overwhelm them, especially if they're not familiar with camp or your system, right? I always like to say, and this is not in a bad way, it's all about the lowest common denominator, right? Think about that person that has never gone to camp. It's their first day walking onto your site. They're there for staff training. They're super nervous, super excited. And you hand them a sheet of paper that has 50 sessions on it in a spreadsheet grid with like, you know, some of them start on the hour, some of them start 5 hours later, some of them are just for lifeguards, some are just for rope staff. This person is going to run away. And they could be the best volunteer or staff member you've ever had. So my take on it is, yes, give them information, but you should make it fun. I used to do a session years ago about make it fun. Every day at staff training, you should make a staff newsletter, right? That just gives them like the basic information, a game, like a quiz they should be playing with each other, and what the food is for that day. And that's it, right? Now, there are going to be people who are like type A, who really need to know what the schedule is. You can put that on the back of the piece of paper, but it shouldn't be the first thing that everybody, it can be really overwhelming. And on the other hand, I think you make a good point, Jennifer, that, you know, people want to know, how long am I going to be sitting there for? You don't want them looking at their watches necessarily, or their phones, or whatever it might be, wherever people tell time these days. But I think sometimes some mystery is okay. I think building some tension is okay. That, oh, I don't know how long I'm going to be listening to Dave for. Hopefully it's not that long, right? Hopefully he stops eventually, but some tension, I think sometimes is all right, because it causes them to maybe pay attention more. Whereas if you say this is going to be a 30-minute session, there's the risk of them looking at their watch and at 20 minutes saying, oh, thank God this is almost over, and kind of zoning out for the rest of it. So there's a delicate balance there. What is the most important training module that many camps aren't doing yet? Oh, is that a question for me, Tanya? Are you putting me on the spot here?
I am putting you on the spot, yes.
That's such a good question. Can I have a moment to think about it?
Sure, yeah.
I won't leave until I answer it. Brandon said I put times on mine, but also have a note at the bottom that times can. Great, that's smart. Yeah. All right, Tanya. So here's what I think. I don't know if it's one singular session, but kind of going back to my soapbox, I think here's the most important thing that I think should happen at staff training, no matter how long it is, whether it's 4 hours or 1 week. And I think some of you might have heard me say this before. The first, and again, it's depending on how long, let's say 10%, 5%, 2%, however long you have to give, should be a party. Just throw a party, because that's what you're doing for however long your camp program is. You're basically party planners. Not to discount any of the work that you're doing as a former camp director who's married to a camp director who's listening to me right now, right? Throw a party. When they get there, have everybody try and show up at the same time the best way you can. I've actually had camps close the gate and they won't let people in until a specific time. Have music blaring, have a snow cone machine, have a barbecue, whatever it is. If it's in the morning, have coffee, bagels, whatever you like to do. Throw a party. That should be the first, however long you can sacrifice.
That's really,
paperwork.
really, thank you.
Yeah. Phew, really I'm glad I came up with that one. So I don't know if that qualifies as a session, Tanya, I'm sorry. But I do think that I don't know if it's that camps aren't doing, but I think we just have to face it head on. To answer your question a little bit more directly, we just have to face it head on that mental health in this country is a real issue. Especially, I think more so, a lot of my clients are organizations like yours. Whether it's, I work with burn survivor camps, I work with underprivileged youth, right, camps. And I think for these populations that are already compromised, that are already dealing with so much, mental health for campers is a huge issue, but I think keeping our staff healthy, mentally and physically, is much more important than it's ever been. We have always, I think, done really well with campers, and whether it's an environment like yours or a private camp or whatever it is, like keeping tabs on campers, making sure they're okay, providing them with services. And we've maybe, and again, this is generally speaking, neglected staff a little bit. And I think it's way past the time that we spend more time focused on their well-being and making sure that they're okay, because we're trusting them with so much and we owe it to them. For a lot of you, they're volunteering their time. They probably have difficult jobs or they're dealing with stress in their own lives, and you can't just put that all on hold. And they're taking care of kids who have been through a lot the past few years, who are normally going through a lot, and then have been added on to by everything that's been going on. So that, Tanya, would be my specific answer. So I gave you 2 for 1.
It's a bonus. I appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Any other questions? We still have a few minutes. They left
Dave,
me 15 minutes of questions because they thought I'd be so thought-provoking.
I just wanted to piggyback on what you just said about taking care of staff. So we do this, it's about a 30-minute discussion, and it's just peer-to-peer, counselor to counselor. now's a great time to ask your peers questions that they were maybe too afraid to ask me as the director. And what I've found is that the returning staff really take ownership of it and share their experience. The new staff will be much more comfortable and ask their questions, and it engages everybody regardless of their experience level. And it always goes much deeper than I would even consider, because it's the counselor's experience and they're telling it from their perspective, which I don't even remember anymore at this point. And it always seems to turn into a therapy session by the end, where they get really deep about their fears, or really deep about, I struggled with this last year. Can somebody help me try to figure this out? And I always do it at the end of one of the days. And it's one of those nights that at 10 o'clock at night, I'll look out the window and the staff are still sitting by the lake, just having their own conversation. So I definitely recommend just doing a sort of peer-to-peer conversation.
Ryan, can I ask, do you leave the room or do you stay in the room?
I stay in the room, but I put it on our head counselors to really be the main facilitators of it.
That's great. Yeah, I've seen it done both ways, where people have either stayed or left because they want them to be open about it. I mean, you obviously want a spy in the room to tell you later what happened, right? And what some of the I mean, it's important. It's not in like a bad way. Something else that I do along those lines is and I think I've done it with some people on this call, maybe, is I do a goals exercise where people write down their goals for the summer, but in a very directed way, and share it with others who theoretically they're going to be working closely with. That's usually the best way to do it. And you learn a lot about somebody, because some of the goals are not so goals. They're more like, what are you most concerned about this summer? Or it's phrased in the way of, what do you want to accomplish this summer, right? When it comes to your own personal growth. And you learn a lot about people that way. It makes you vulnerable, and it starts some other conversations usually. And then it's also some accountability as the summer goes on, because now you've talked to somebody about what you're looking forward to, what you're trying to accomplish, what you want to do. So those are all conversations that are really important. Don't take much effort on your part. Don't take much time either, right? You can do these conversations pretty quickly. You'd be amazed at how long 10 minutes is. It's pretty. I did this at this session at Tri-State that I was talking about. I did it with another person, and Max and I decided, we talked about the book Atomic Habits, which if you haven't looked at, you should. And one of the exercises is to sit for 2 minutes in silence and just write about something that's been holding you back and what you would do about it. Right, just like right, and I just said, just write something for 2 minutes. And in the middle of this session, with a couple hundred people in the room, we were literally silent for 2 or 3 minutes. I think it's 3 minutes, 2 minutes or 3 minutes. I can't remember. Just silence, absolute silence. Every single person in the room took out a piece of paper and wrote for 2 minutes straight. And when I asked, "Do you feel better now?" every single person raised their hand, and it took 2 minutes, and that's it. That's all it takes for some people, for everybody, I think. So having these conversations can be quick, it can be easy, doesn't need a lot of planning. So Ryan brings up a great point. Thanks, Ryan.
And to your point about goals, I asked our staff to write down their 3 personal goals for themselves, and then get with their co-counselor and make 3 cabin goals. And I used that as the basis of my evaluations this year. And it led to much more personalized evaluations. And there was more of a sliding scale depending on how hard they wanted to be on each other. And I also asked them to tell me to write down the reason that they're at Happiness is Camping. Why are you at a camp for kids with cancer specifically, or why have you been here for 10 years? And I learned so much about people that I've known for 10 years, and I never knew some of their personal motivations. So that was a great exercise for me and for the staff as well.
And you could use that also, Ryan, that's great. You could use that sheet or those answers as ongoing feedback, right? As conversation starters. Because most of the time at camp, I would assume that most of us just walk around like I used to and just say, "How you doing? Everything good? How's it going?" Right? That's just normal, and we're busy. But if you had more information, you know, about what their goals are for the summer, what their personal goals are, and you could say, how's goal number 2, whatever it is, how's it going? Oh my gosh. And it doesn't, again, it's short. It's still 30 seconds to a minute, right? You don't have to sit there for an hour with anybody. Or you could say is, you know what? You said you were at Happiness at Camping because of X, Y, Z. Is it happening for you? Is that happening, right? If not, how can I help that, right? How can I facilitate that for you? So you can use it as a real conversation, which will blow people's minds, that you actually ask them a real question, not just how you doing. Awesome.
I love that because you're showing you're invested as the camp director with your volunteers. And I think, you know, by showing that genuine interest in their goals, you're making that future investment. You know, what I'm here with that volunteer, what I'm hearing right now from some of our camps is that they're operating at 60% of volunteers right now, and they need volunteer staff, they need male staff, they need equipped staff. And, you know, you need to have tools in your toolbox in order to show that investment in those volunteers. So that's a great idea. Love it.
Yeah, people like to be cared about and thought of as human beings, and not just somebody taking kids from swim to lunch, back to swim, and making sure they don't do anything bad at night, right? People, even if they're volunteering, they want to be seen as important. And, you know, again, I said at the beginning, it's not a bad thing. We all have ego, and we have to realize that and play into it and recognize it and treat people as real people, because they will come back and they'll bring other people with them. If it's a place that they feel cared for, they feel connected, they feel somebody's listening, and they feel valuable. And that's how you do it. All right, we did it. 6:12. There's a lot of pressure for tomorrow now. 6:13 tomorrow. Well, I appreciate it, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. I hope to see some of you again tomorrow. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'll throw my email address in there just in case you don't have it. I'll put it in the chat. Would love to hear from you. And have a wonderful evening, unless Jennifer, Ryan, anybody else have anything?
Hope y'all can join tomorrow night. If not, register so you can get the recording. And Dave, would love to have your presentation materials too, if you can share
Of
those with
course.
us. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Great job, Dave. Great job, Ryan. Great job, Callie.